Now we want to get to our panel discussion, where again I stress I want to have lots of Q&A with the audience. You've already met Professor Ed Blakely. You've already met Mark McCrindle. I'd like to introduce our other two panelists now, if I may. Michael Edgar is currently the Acting General Manager of the Shire Council, recently appointed. Congratulations on that appointment. Michael, after, I guess, the retirement of a long-standing Dave Walker, who was GM for many, many years, I believe. But congratulations on your appointment, even though it's only acting at this stage. As acting GM, he's responsible for leading one of Australia's fastest growing and most financially stable councils. He's a wealth of experience in local government and was formerly Group Manager for Strategic Planning for the last 11 years. He's also worked at a number of other councils, including the Blue Mountains. Michael's been heavily involved in working with the state government in planning for future growth in the Sydney Hills that will accompany the arrival of the Sydney Metro Northwest. I got it right because I called it the Northwest Rail Link. Apologies for that. Especially planning the communities that will arise around the new stations. We're interested to talk about that. He is currently planning and designing a number of significant sporting facilities, including using artificial surfaces that can meet the growing demand for sport in the hills. Thank you for being here with us, Michael. And to Michael's right is Steve Grant. Steve Grant is one of the industry's most well-known and respected professionals with a long history of delivering quality projects and pushing the boundaries to deliver better outcomes on any project. Capital Corporation has been integral to the outstanding growth of the Norwest Business Park. Steve came together with Ben Fairfax in 2009 when they started Bluestone Property Solutions, an innovative development organisation with strategic partnering at its core. Delivering a range of successful projects across the residential, industrial and mixed-use classes, Bluestone Property Solutions offered a unique partnership approach to delivering results to their clients. In 2015, Steve formally joined Capital Corporation with Bluestone Property Solutions to form Capital Bluestone. Thank you for being here, Steve. And as you're probably aware, Steve has a fairly significant development in Norwest Business Park on the immediate horizon. So the point of the panel discussion is to explore this concept of what needs to be the future vision for the Hills. We know the Hills is changing. We know transformation is taking place. We've had already a couple of presentations about that. I guess we have the option to either sit back and wait for it to happen and kind of see what happens, or we have an opportunity to drive a vision for the Hills and as a community, local and state government, make that vision a reality. So to explore that a little bit further, I'd like to put a little bit more meat on the bones on this kind of transformation, if we can. And I'll ask Michael Edgar to respond. So we've heard that we're really in a, I guess, once in several generation transformation for the Hills, with population growth, business growth, the light rail link, etc. Biggest crane I've ever seen in my life currently in the centre of Castle Hill as I drove in this morning. How does the council see the transformation? What is the Hills going to look like if you look at a horizon of the next 10 years or so?
Thank you for the question, and it's great to be here, and thank you, Premier, on behalf of the Shire Council for coming to visit us today. And I think the best way to start answering that question is the buzz in the room. And yes, Premier, you've caused the buzz in the room. And I am happy to say there's a lot of local representation in the room. Council's got over half of its councils here today and a table full of staff. So in terms of networking, you can really get to the grit by talking to our local councillors and our staff.
But that's okay. They told me earlier on that you can say whatever you like, Michael.
Thanks.
It's okay, so they're not going to hold anything against you.
But look, there is a high degree of optimism in our community, and it's rightly so. The council, over a long period of time, have put their mind to what the Shire does in terms of supporting Sydney's population growth. And that's in the form of housing, but just as importantly, jobs. And we have already in our planning framework enough land zoned for our future job targets, if I could call it that, and housing targets. So the land's there, the zoning's done, and the heavy lifting in that policy framework has been done. But now it's over to the results on the ground, and the last couple of years has been phenomenal. And if I can put it into this context, in the GFC years, we were probably producing around about 400 development sites for house sites a year. But the last 2 years, it's been over 2,000 per annum. And even this year to date, 2,000 development sites for housing sites has been approved already. And there's another 2,000 sitting on our desks over there waiting when we get back from lunch to turn our minds to. So that's a phenomenal change. And what follows housing growth of those sort of numbers will be jobs growth. And I am pleased to see that the PSI index already shows the needle pointing in the right direction. But I think, to coin a phrase, the best is yet to come, because we're seeing people turn up very rapidly to our Shire, and it's evident wherever we go. And I think that's naturally going to turn its way into demand for services and demand for jobs. And with the infrastructure that's coming, and thank goodness for the Northwest Metro, because it is going to future-proof us to a certain degree. At the moment, road or foot traffic is our only way. The railway changes all that. So it's a massive game changer for our area, and we're very grateful for it, and we've got to use it to our benefit. So I hope that answers your question.
Population growth, Michael. What do we see as a population growth in the next?
Well, we expect, and these are all forecasts, and there's a lot of assumptions go in there, but if Sydney's growing by 2.4 million people over the next 20 years or so, we're expecting 100,000 of those to come and call the hills home. So all things being equal, we're well and truly on track for that. So barring other economic blips or other factors external, we can expect to see that many more people in our Shire.
And we're 167,000 at the moment, I think I would say. And 100,000 is over the next 20 years, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you, Michael, for the scene set. I'm going to ask each of the panellists, if I can, a couple of questions, and then we'll start the discussion if we can. Mark McCrindle, I read a very interesting blog that you posted the other day, which kind of referenced these population changes, and you identified an age gap in the hills. Can I ask you about that, to share that with the group?
Sure, yeah. The hills, if we know the demographics of the local area, lots of schools, and this area punches above its weight with families, particularly young families and school-aged children. Does well on the older retirement side. It's a place people, great lifestyle, people want to settle here. But Gen Y is where there's that real gap, particularly those at the younger edge, so late teens and through their early, indeed late 20s. There's this missing 20-something gap, and we can understand the reason. There's no university campus in the area. Young people are a bit aspirational and perhaps want a bit of a CBD lifestyle from a work perspective, young professionals these days. So we haven't been able to retain and indeed attract that 20-something gap. Now, if that continues and the 20-somethings find lifestyles elsewhere, then that can have some ongoing problems with the demographic diversity of an area. So how can we attract and retain the 20-somethings? That's I think the key challenge. The other big reality there is, as soon as the 20s turn early 30s, is housing affordability, and so they're starting their life in Parramatta or further west, and that maybe is where they're putting roots down. So that's the demographic challenge for the hills.
Excellent, thank you, Mark. And Steve, from a developer's perspective, obviously you wouldn't be developing in this region if you hadn't done a lot of modelling, I guess, as to how you see the growth and the characteristics. Would you just like to share your perspective on?
I think it's a pretty easy scenario. We've always followed infrastructure, and I don't think you could pick a better time to follow infrastructure, and the rail, etc., is just going to totally change the way we live and the way we work. And it's hard. I feel for those people who have to make those decisions, car parking and roads networks and those sorts of things. It's a difficult situation to cling to what we're used to, but to actually forecast what's going to be. And I know with our projects now, we're doing a lot of work with carpooling and with bicycles and with public transport. In one of our projects at Bulwer Bay, we actually undertook to provide the public transport the first day the project opened, because at that stage we couldn't get transport for New South Wales for commitment, because it's just a process, we needed an approval before they'd make the commitment. So we undertook to provide the public transport. And it's that sort of innovation that gets projects going. One of our big bugbears is the amount of parking we put in that's below ground. I can't see why, when we start with a site, the first thing we do is dig a hole. For 3 months we cut this material away when everyone's going to school and to work. Why are we putting it below ground? I was in Auckland last week, and they've got a project over there, and I've seen it twice, and I didn't realise that the parking was actually all above ground. That's how well it was designed. So we've got great architects, and they should be allowed to show what they can do and put parking above ground. And the day that we don't need so many car parking spaces for that particular project, that converts then into residential or commercial or that sort of thing. So we've done that ourselves many years ago on our project at Parramatta, and we've got a new planning proposal going into council shortly, and that is designed on that same method as well. So it's one thing to sort of predict the future or to see how you work with it, but then says, well, okay, once you've got that building, that doesn't mean that that can't change for the future as well.
Okay, great, thank you. And Professor Ed Blakely, we spoke about your kind of international experience. You shared with us the West Central District Plan. You know, what we hear is obviously transformation. From your experience internationally, what are the challenges with that transformation? Because there are probably opportunities and pitfalls that you've experienced elsewhere.
They're obvious, and one of them I'd like to mention is Orange County, California, where Irvine is, and great place, and it's anchored to retain the people he's talking about, because they built the housing, and it's the scale of housing. You need all scales. You need executive housing, you need the intermediate housing, and then the larger scale housing. And so what we need here is a real knowledge anchor. It may not be a university, but it has to be that will knowledge proof us, combined with the transportation. And of course, while we're developing all these bright, beautiful places, we need some funky places too, where kids can play their guitars and all that kind of stuff. So I think what we need is that kind of crucible where people can play, live, and work in the same space.
Great, thank you. So is it worthwhile as exploring this concept of the vision for the Hills to drive the community and drive the initiatives within the community?
Most places have either an explicit or an implicit vision statement. When you say the Big Apple, you know what you're talking about. And we need that same kind of things. That's what draws people to you, if they know who you are and what you're about. But it does need to have a future orientation. I just came from the Vatican. I don't think that's our vision. So we've got to get out there to a new space, a new place, because that's what young people are looking for. When Mark's talking about young people, they're looking for places where they can make a contribution. They're going to be creating the jobs. They're going to be creating the knowledge where. And we have to create a community where they can do that and start out in one better and end up in a nice executive home in the same neighborhood.
So we might explore what a new vision might look like in a second. Vivian, can I ask you to pull up those strengths that came from the PSI, but I might open it up to the audience just to some comments on what we've discussed so far. And I know Councillor Hardy had a question. Can we have the microphones, guys, down the front here? Tony Hay? Just a couple of questions, just to sort of explore the community's perspective on what we've just already heard.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, panellists, and Madam Premier, for your contribution to today. Councillor Tony Hay from the Hills Shire Council. I've been to Irvine. I've had a look at what you've been talking about, Professor Blakely. We've also had a look at what Steve Grant's talked about with regards to what we saw in Los Angeles with the parking being the first few levels, and that underground parking wasn't an issue. We've actually explored that in the hills, and we have got a project, the Esplanade, that has got above ground parking exactly for that transitional mode change when we find that the millennials are not using vehicles, they're using Uber car share, Uber rides, and we had a presentation recently from Uber CEO in Perth that talked about that change. But you talk about, Anthony, about driving the change here, driving the vision. Driving is a nightmare. The first thing that we have done when our kids turned 17, in my case, was we bought them a motor vehicle. We add to that cross-regional transport transit time. We don't have that transport-oriented development. It's coming with the Northwest Metro. I think that we'll see some great changes there. But if I could just ask the panel, how do you ground truth the future of what our regional road network is congesting with our local road network? How do we get an outcome that we get the infrastructure spend on those regional roads to free up the congestion that we experience here on the local roads?
Great question. Thank you. Who'd like to respond to that?
Just a brief thing, thinking about that emerging generation, I think that's where you've got a chance to shape behaviours. People in the hills are pretty rusted onto our cars. You know, it's all we've ever known, haven't had a rail line here. It's hard to change that 30, 40, 50-year behaviour. But this next generation, particularly with the opportunity, these new metros, the retail going in, with the accommodation, with potentially, well, the business opportunities, you think co-working spaces, we think education, we think, you know, fintech or high tech and biotech, and those sectors that are really going to draw young people and create the lifestyle, the walkable community. That's what they resonate with. It's happening in Ultimo, you know, it's happening in the inner city, and it can happen here as well. And when you get that densification, you get that opportunity. So I think we're on the cusp of seeing that. And if we can get the ingredients right, I think this next generation, you know, this will become an attraction point for 20-somethings. It's not a place you can't wait to leave because it's uncool, you know. And if we can turn that mindset around, I think in 20 years' time it'll be quite different for young people.
Okay, excellent. Who else would like to comment on that? Steve?
Well, I know Michael's got a lot to say on this, so I won't stand his way. One of our businesses is quite unique. A lot of people say, what's the one thing that makes the difference? And the one thing was that there's not one thing, it's 100 things. And that's what I think the answer is. It's not one thing. It's you've got to plan it, you've got to make a lot of small changes, and every one of those you grasp and hold on to it and be innovative to get those changes and work them through, but we won't change it overnight. And that's we can't give up at that. We can't say it's too hard. So we've got to make those changes, and you've got to try things. You've got to try things that at the time just seemed so different, because like in the hills, you know, when we were growing up, it was you had to have 2 cars in the family, if not 4. But we've got to change that, and this rail line will change it. Michael and I debate this a heck of a lot with different projects we're working on, and one day he opened my eyes to the changes, because I look at the changes, but from his point of view at council, he can't have time to drive up to the towers, for instance, to do some shopping. Well, now with that train line in, he can, and those sort of changes are things that will stop those cars driving on the road during the day. So apart from the fact of everyone coming to work and going home again. So my recommendation is to look at everything, not the big things, a whole lot of range of things.
Just to comment on that, I have to admit that I in fact do have 4 cars in our household because I have 2 children in their 20s now that I'm trying to actually get out of our household and move elsewhere. But Michael, you probably have a comment or two that you wanted to make.
Yeah, I think they call it a hospital pass, wasn't it? But you answered it very well anyway. Yes. But I was trawling some information last night on the ABS site, as you do. And I read a couple of interesting little figures last night that said, look, last year in 2016 we had 24.4 million Australians, and I think that was confirmed by the slide earlier today. But there was also 18.4 million registered vehicles in Australia. So that means for every 1.332 persons in Australia, there's a registered vehicle, now albeit not just a car, but it's trucks, buses and all the other registered vehicles. But if we look at our city of Sydney and think, well, 2.4 million more people over the next 20 years, by extension, that's potentially 2 million more registered vehicles. So we really do have to look at a whole series of options about how we might manage that into the future. And it's not a question of stop growing because it's coming. It's about how we grow and how we manage that growth and potentially the growing pains that come with it.
Other questions? I think there was some people putting their hands up over here. I think I saw. I know there's a couple over here, definitely. I'll come back to those if I can. Yeah, down at the back there, if I can.
Hi, my name's Linda Langton. I'm actually a working mum in the Hills District. My question actually relates to slightly what Mark said about the demographics of the Hills and having a lot of families that obviously have children in the area. For me to get to work, I actually have to make 2 or 3 drop-offs before I get to work because I've got kids to drop off to schools, daycares, etc., etc. So for me, my car's really important to me. If the trend of this area is growing, and obviously we've also got a lot of working mums in the Hills, we do need our cars to obviously get to work and to, pick the kids up from school during the day if they're sick, etc., etc. Though we can't rely on public transport. So what plans or visions have been taken into account, considering we're all saying the railway's great and that's brilliant, but for those who do need their cars on a day-to-day basis for the mums pickups and things like that, the roads are still going to be congested. So what plans are in place for that?
Well, I'd like to start out on this. In our district plan, you've heard about the 30-minute city. One of the ways of accomplishing that is bundling things. We want the school, the shopping center, the library, all those things in close proximity. And so as we go about providing permission for building, and we're going to do this here in Bella Vista, we're not going to look at building by building. We're looking at the entire neighborhood. We're going to permit an entire neighborhood. So all those things. So when you drop your kid off at school and you go to work, it's next door or down the street. And you can use that public transportation as much as possible. The problem is not the car, so we've scattered things around. We have to densify our public services, our essential services, so that you don't have to move as much. Maybe you move once, but 3 or 4 times is just too much.
Any other comment on that? Or was I
I think from our point of view, what we're doing with our latest buildings that we're looking at, it's a mixture of business and residential, but more than that for the business particularly is to have childcare facilities on site and a lot of other facilities, too many to name, but the whole thing is then making that self-contained. And I think from as far as competitive edge, you've got to have those things, otherwise they'll go to some other location. So that's one thing that we debate a lot. The harder it is to do business here, the harder it is for us to get tenants or new companies here. So the whole thing we should be working on as far as business growth is to make it easier to do business here, and that's exactly what you were just saying before. That part of it easy as well.
Great question. One other question. I think I saw one over here somewhere. Did I? Okay, there's a hand up there. John?
Thanks, Richard. John from Summit Care. We're a leading provider of aged care and have our corporate office and a new aged care facility here in Baulkham Hills that will open in October. 187 rooms, 232 residents. So I'm interested in the panel's idea about a bit similar to childcare. Once upon a time, childcare was where you lived. Now it's where you work. Is there any sense that aged care similarly needs to mature? People want to be close to their loved ones. Is there a time now where aged care needs to be where their loved ones are rather than where people once grew up and wanted to retire?
I obviously have the answer, being aged. Look, one of the things we have to look at is the single residential unit with a lot of senior citizen in the way we go in the future, or some of the projects I've been involved in Victoria, where the seniors are even working with the young people and the nursery school and mixed income housing, and I think we get kind of a quality care that goes through the day. And perhaps there are places where people aren't ambulatory anymore in the same area or neighborhood. I think that's called Mossman.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed. And no, you weren't chosen to be part of the panel due to the diversity of the group. Any other questions? Yes, one more. Down here at the front, Ray Hardy.
Yeah, Councillor Raymond Hardy, Shire Council. All the debate that we hear, which is pretty much a constant, is that population growth is going to bring with it density. Now, density can take many forms, whether it's through our land release areas, reduced lot sizes, whether it's the high-rise development that will occur around the stations on Norwest Metro. Now, that brings challenges in terms of what the urban design should be and how we build into that quality of life, the essential ingredient of public realm. Public realm in any form of density becomes a critical issue, and how does it get funded? Okay. Now, we know we have developer contributions in terms of Section 94. We know there is limitations what goes into a contribution plan, but if we are to create that sense of place, that sense of quality of life, then it will very much dictate that there may be more than one model in relation to urban design, urban intensification, and when we look at the hills, it becomes obvious where some of those intensification locations should occur. So my question is, how do we fund building in that public realm, that sense of place, that really contributes to the quality of lifestyle that we're all advocating for?
Excellent question. Thank you. Who'd like to respond to that?
And just a brief one from me on, having run a lot of market research in this area. I think the Hills is a it's got a unique mix. It's got the acreage. It's obviously got a lot of the suburban areas, but now it's adding that densification, that high-rise vertical community, which is new for this area, but it's not the sole future. It's the Garden Shire, so people are still going to want the detached homes and indeed the acreage. So I think it's how you can maintain that and not think that, as you're saying, Raymond, that everything is one solution in terms of more and more densification. That will offer opportunities and lifestyles for those opting for that, and it's not just young people, it's downsizing baby boomers as well that are looking for that apartment living. But as long as that's mixed still with maintaining the suburban and then the semi-rural areas of an area like this. And as for the funding, one of the key challenges in the Hills, even more than the rest of Sydney, as much as it is everywhere else, is the cost of living. So it's finding ways beyond just adding further burdens to those new homeowners as to how that infrastructure, which is so important, is funded.
Any other comments on that? Yeah,
I went and looked up some notes last night as well.
Good. I'm glad we have a very highly prepared panel.
But when we started Edinburgh Homes in 2000, our sort of general line of what we're building would be a house worth $280,000 on a block of land worth $165,000. And in those days, we would build house and land packages for about $450,000 to $650,000. 2017, we're building a house for $350,000, which is about a 25% increase, on a block of land that costs $550,000. That's a 223% increase on the land. But beat this, the 2000 era, we were building on 500 square metres, now we're building on 330 square metres. So that, in fact, is a 4% increase in the land value. Now, when you get a situation because of the infrastructure and someone's house at Castle Hill goes from being 1.8 million to 3.8 million or $4 million, and they get to keep that money in their pocket and there's no services sort of provided out of that increase, there's only one group paying for it, that's the community. And that to me is where, as a group, as a community group, we're losing out because we're not putting enough infrastructure in for future. This government's managed to do it, which is to be applauded. It's just remarkable as to what we had previously in many years to what we've been able to do now. But will other governments be able to do it? Or should there be some sort of payment back on that upscale of value that comes from the rezoning and the development around us?
Interesting. Any other comments on that?
Look, just very briefly, and I think well said, Steve, because again, it can't just be the council, it just can't be the developer, it just can't be the state government alone. It's got to be everyone's got to play our part, and of course, as we grow, the protection of public realm, our streets and our parks and places where we want to gather and move within, have to be first class. They have to be places we want to be. And part of that narrative is getting the housing mix right as well. If we only build one kind of product or one kind of response, well, that's going to not help us in one, attract the diversity, one, we need, but two, deal with the affordability debate. Because what we've just seen with Steve's stats is that it's not so much a housing crisis based on construction value, but it's certainly one based on the increased cost of land, even though our land sizes are getting smaller. So that's a very key area I think we've got to look at, as to figure out, well, what could be done differently.
Again, what I hear from these discussions is a lot of change happening. Try perhaps to orientate the discussion a little bit to more about what the vision might be. If we may. The picture that was up there that's now, just as I've gone to pointed to, is gone, which is now back, thank you, Eob. This was actually a question in the PSI. It's actually in the PSI report in front of you. And it was a question that we asked, what do you see as the future strengths for business in the Hills? I guess our focus is business in this room. Please select the three most significant future strengths of doing business in the Hills, because as a community we are both going to take advantage of and drive that growth in the region. And my panellists can't see it, but I can perhaps read out the top 10 if I may. The number one, of course, was the Northwest Rail Line. We all understand that is going to be the biggest transformation. The second was actually the location. So people clearly like being in this region, love being in this region, probably because of the third. And the third is because of the work-life balance. Now, obviously, for those who have to travel into the city or other areas, that work-life balance is impacted some part by our infrastructure challenges. The fourth one was actually the Hills business and culture in the region. Fifth was commute times and distances. Sixth was customer base. Seventh, infrastructure. NBM connection. I'm going to go to 10 purely because number 9 happens to state that the local business networks like the Sydney Hills Business Chamber, 13% is going to be important to them too, and that is just one above the fact that the region is family friendly. So it's great to know that the Chamber is even more friendly than your own families, which is great news given the amount of time that some of us spend together, which is fantastic. So those are the strengths that you as a business community have identified. How do you take advantage of those as a business community? How do you leverage those even further? I guess we've talked about the rail line. The rail line is pretty obvious. I guess one of the previous discussions we've had at maybe a year ago even was one of the challenges that we see is once it's open, we've actually got to convince people to go and use it. That's obviously going to be one of our challenges, I guess, isn't it? What experience have we had, perhaps, Ed, in other environments where that's happened, or is it just going to happen?
No, it doesn't just happen. Irvine's a classic case where it's a new community, and you have to start with a couple of core values. And you mentioned one that's very important: family friendly. If you can build family into the workplace, as Steve is doing, we're going to have more public-private partnerships where the child care center, the school, the park, and so forth. New York doesn't run parks. They're community parks. They're privatized in the sense they're communitized. And I think we're going to see more of this sort of thing where these things come together. But you have to start out with one major priority. If this is the family-friendly place, let's make sure every time we open a retail store, every time we build a building, and I can tell you, sitting on our panels, we are looking not at the building, we're looking at the precinct. What is going on there to make sure this is a good place to live? If the family is at the top of that pyramid, you're going to be distinct. And that distinction is the thing that separates communities all over the world.
And one thing on that, you know, and analysing the survey results, people clearly love this area. You know, they're passionate, raving fans. You see it in the NPS. People are invested here. They like it because they live locally, they work locally. All those things that Ed was discussing, you know, that makes a livable community. And so the lifestyle is there, and it's family friendly and all of that. So people, and that's why the sentiment, you know, people are looking forward, thinking it's going to get better, it's going to get better. I think that the key thing, because we're talking about business, not just lifestyle, is how can we make sure businesses are thriving, growing and productive? How can they be profitable? And we saw earlier the statistics that 97.5% of all businesses nationally employ fewer than 20 people. So they don't have a lot of capacity or flex. There's some vulnerability there. In the hills, it's 98%, so even more likely to be small businesses. We found in this study that those that are the employing businesses, but on the smaller side, have the least capacity to ride out economic storms. The non-employing businesses, they're okay. They're not paying a payroll, or not paying wages, and then the larger ones have a bit more give. So the challenge is, how can we nurture these 20,000 businesses in the area, manage the costs? The infrastructure was a pain point, but that's on track, that's being solved. It's the expenses side, it's the regulation side, it's the red tape side, it's the cost of doing business. How can we, for these small businesses that don't have a lot of capacity, get through that so they can grow and be supported in their growth so they can be profitable in the long term?
Yep. Excellent. And of course, the survey indicated that the challenge of red tape was the second, I guess, negative in the section 2. But for businesses in the region, if we're going to attract things like businesses to cover the age gap that we talked about, that go from the 20s to the 30s, etc. What are the types of businesses that we can attract in the region? Councillor Lowe, you got a question?
I probably don't need a microphone. I've got a loud enough voice. Jeff Lowe, Hillshire Councillor. I've recently been at a conference. Thank you. Recently been at a conference in Perth with my fellow colleagues here, and one of the things that we did hear about talking about businesses is that in the next 3 years, 50% of the workforce are going to be the millennials. Now, apparently you don't get rabies when these people bite you, okay? They're actually okay. But 27% of those are going to be in senior management. One of the other things that came out of discussion in either a panel session or a conversation I had with the presenter afterwards was that people aren't going to be working in one job from Monday to Friday. They're going to be working maybe for Steve Grant for Monday to Wednesday doing development. Then they're going to go and work for Mark and in research for one day, and then they're going to spend a day at the bowling club with the grandma. So they're the kind of things that I'm throwing out there, because that's one of the interesting things, that how we as businesses looking at adapting to that in the hills. Good question. I'm interested in the business community's response to that. But Steve,
that's sort of one thing that keeps me awake at night, really, with worrying about what buildings we're going to have for those sorts of people. The only sort of anything that we've got that sort of caters for that now is serviced office type facility. And a lot of time now, even when we do a hotel, it has all the facilities, gymnasium, restaurants, everything, but serviced office as well, because it has a transient sort of part to it. But it is, if you look at what we've done over the years, we've done 45 buildings here now at Norwest, and people say, well, where do those people come from? A lot of them were companies that were run or had a strong interest with people that were working for that company that could make the decision to move to the hills. Even Woolworths was basically around the fact of more people on the panel lived around this area. And that's one thing where regardless of what they're doing, they will tend to favour the hills. It doesn't surprise me that we're batting above our weight as far as what we're performing, as far as business and that. We're just typical Australians. They send us out here in a boat and then they get amazed at what we build as far as the country's concerned. This is just typical of it, given the task. You know, we've got a great business park here and it's expanding. I think what I like, the fact is there's further business parks going out further beyond, Marsden Park and those sorts of things, because we've been the limit in a lot of ways for those businesses we're trying to attract, not manufacturers so much, but the people out of North Ryde and Macquarie Park. We've had to convince them to come this far. Well, now there's someone else trying to convince them to go further. So even that one thing's going to change a lot of the inquiry we get.
I think I just might add just ever so briefly, because one of the things I think we've got to acknowledge, in part in dealing with the scenario that Councillor Lowe just outlined, is technology. And technology will change the way we work and the way and the location of where we can work. And I remember fondly in the 70s growing up in primary school, and the teacher said at this particular day, technology is going to give us more free time, you know, much more leisure time. I'm glad it worked out for us, because what it's actually done is given us more time to kind of blend our work and home lives in a little bit more seamlessly. And I think that adaptation is just part and parcel of the technology uptake and our evolution.
Okay, a couple of thoughts, if I can, just around. We know we have to fix the infrastructure. We know it's coming. We want to still be family friendly. We want a positive a positive culture in the hills. But what does business want over and above that? What do we need to be able to thrive? Question down the back there. Phil, you were very fast in putting your hand up. What are the things that would help you that we haven't already talked about that as a community we can drive?
Phil Diversity from Diversity Consulting Engineers. I have a business in Norwest as well. One thing that's I'm passionate about at the moment, how do we grow floor space? There seems to be a lack of commercial real estate in the park at the moment, from what I'm hearing. I've seen businesses move to Parramatta. I've considered it myself to find the floor space. At the moment, there seems to be a trend to increasing residential in the business park, which I also encourage as well. But there seems to be a lack of conversation around maybe some additional floor space in commercial buildings. I'm wondering whether council's considered that in maybe a revamp or a vision for the business park, and whether there is a bold new vision for the hills and the business park for the next 20 years. We've seen the Norwest rail link, create great opportunity here, and that's set a vision for what could be. But what's the next step? What's the next vision? And does it include commercial?
I think the very short answer of that is absolutely. At the moment, the flavour of the day is housing growth. And then very quickly after that, I think I mentioned a little earlier, you will see business growth follow. There isn't an absence of land zoned for business and business growth. It is a question of just having the right conditions for that to be taken up. Certainly, jobs growth in terms of council's planning is very much at the forefront, because if we are to maintain quality of life and we are to prosper, we need to make sure that we've got the ability to have the jobs that we need very close to home. And obviously, our land that's zoned for employment is very near and dear to us. In terms of the growth of residential in Norwest Business Park, that is only primarily occurred in areas that permit it already. So it's not at the expense of jobs, and I will expect to see in the future more buildings, and it wasn't that long ago that I think the council's decision to come to Norwest took up a lot of free space at a time when it was very difficult to lease that free space. I think we're starting to see that switch, and I think you'll start seeing more projects built in the commercial space in the future.
Question. Did you have a question down here? No, sorry, I thought you had a question. Okay.
Just a quick comment on that. Esplanade, which is the project we've got down beside the lake, that was the first project in Norwest to actually sell out all the commercial space off plan. So that sort of indicates that what you're saying is correct. We've got projects at the moment for about 60,000 square metres of office space that we're preparing. But the only trouble that we're going to have as a community on that at the moment is because of the APRA requirements. Back in the day when things were firing here, we were building a 10,000 square metre building on spec, so without any commitment basically, at any stage. Now, you just can't do that anymore. So, we're quite perplexed as to how we're going to build this space and how much we're going to get as far as pre-commitment goes, because that's what will tell us how much we can fund these days.
Question over there, Mike Yeo, I believe.
Certainly, Mike Yeo again. Community, children, families, all growth in this area. And Michael, I think you're going to face a challenge of how many more netball courts, for example, you can fit. The pressure is on. Now, I just picked up on it, if I can segue from your grass. Is there any reason, since we've taken car parks up, people up to live, we couldn't take some sporting facilities up? Could you not have a multi-level, say netball, forget the big sports because that'd be a bit hard, but could you have a multi-level netball using, it doesn't need the sun if you've got your great grass, and you'd have wet weather cover for a lot of the games? Can we start rethinking how we deliver some of our sporting? There's a lot more indoor sports, cricket, and I can't think of all the others, but they could handle multi-level thinking to solve the problem. Is that on the radar, or could it be?
Short answer is it is on the radar. All solutions are on the radar, and we actually advanced some plans on one of our reserves whereby you may have some undercroft parking, and on top of that parking, a form of short court type facility. So yes, it is part of the narrative and part of the solution. Clearly, our biggest demand is on active open space. We are a family shire, and families like to be involved in team sports, and that's a huge demand on us. And happy to say that the council's foreseen the population growth, and it has got infrastructure plans in place. And I think over the next couple of years, you're going to see some fairly significant active open space facilities open. But that doesn't mean we're not thinking about the short court and the smaller format size of the games as well.
Excellent. I'm going to have a couple of questions, if I can, and then we'll ask the panellists to wrap up, because I know we need a little bit of networking time before we close, and there's grand prizes at the end too. I just want to come back to this age gap again, the kind of millennials. What are the types of businesses and the amenities that they want? If that's a group that we have to try and keep in the region, and we're going to get higher density around the stations, there's opportunity to do that. But what are the types of businesses and the types of amenities that group needs? Are there many of those in the room? Not that many, but there's a few, certainly.
We've just heard from fathers of them who are saying they probably want a Mercedes at the coffee shop.
Types of businesses that they need, that they want to work in, space that they want to work in. Diane, question for.
Earlier on, my experience, I guess, dealing with not only staff but work colleagues in that sort of age range is right now they're looking for co-working spaces. So I know we've talked about service offices, but these are kind of hubs where small businesses can develop, where people can innovate. They can actually kickstart projects that will bring larger business into the region. So that's just one thing potentially that we could do to attract them.
Co-working spaces. I think somebody did mention that.
Could I say something here? How many of you have heard of WeWork? WeWork? All right, WeWork is one of the fastest growing franchises in the world. And one of the reasons for that is what we just talked about. People will be doing multiple jobs for multiple employers, and it doesn't make too much sense for you to hire people for short periods of time. We've just gone through a transition in my own outside business, and we say, well, we need someone to do events. In the old situation, we had a person full-time. We said, no, we don't need a full-time person for events. we need a person who can do events. So you just start adding those things up, and there are people out there who do them for a whole bunch of people. And I think that's going to be the way of the future. I have 2 daughters. Neither one of them works for full time. They both have PhDs, by the way, so I'm very proud of them. But neither one of them works full time for a single employer. And actually, it would cost them money if they did. So I think we're coming to a different kind of situation. We're thinking about skills rather than firm.
Yeah, great point. Michael, do you have a comment on that?
Just a short point that I've seen something emerge in the marketplace, and I visited a site down in Ringwood, just outside of Melbourne, late last year. And just like what we see in libraries, where our libraries not only house books and DVDs and magazines, but they are great spaces for people, children, to congregate and study and collaborate with themselves. I think you will see, as part of the retail evolution, because retailing is changing, and I think wait till Amazon arrives and others like it, and you're going to see your traditional retailers needing to do more to attract people to them. So it's more about the experience. And what I saw at Ringwood was a shopping centre where you could go in there and work in the shopping centre, have your services that you've bought to you and bought to your car, but it's got basically a walk-in business centre where you could go and conduct your work from the shopping centre. So these collaborative places, I think you're going to see more innovative approaches, and I think you'll see the retail sector start to lead it.
And that's potentially the opportunity to drive that I was talking about. I might just take one more question, but I'll also give notice to the panel that I'm going to ask you in a minute to do a quick 30-second summation on your perspective on what the vision for the Hills should be. We've kind of danced around a number of subjects here, and I think we've started a conversation. We're going to have this event is being filmed, so we'll all be able to review it and consider that. And the Chamber, I guess, working with the Council, will be happy to take this initiative forward to crystallise the sort of perspective. So the last question, and then I'll ask the panellists to give us a summation if I can. Yes.
Hi, I'm Candice from Energy Ninja. I have a sustainability background, and what I do is actually help people reduce their energy use and costs and all that sort of stuff. I'm not here for the promo, but my question is, you've addressed, when we talk about triple bottom line, we talk about economics and we talk about social, but we haven't actually addressed any environmental issues. Talked about taking cars off the road, 17 hectares of play area, natural area, whatever. But we haven't actually talked about sustainable actions, community gardens, all these big concrete blocks that are going up as apartments and businesses. Where are the trees going to go? How are we going to breathe if there's no room for those? How is that getting addressed?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Who'd like to respond to that question? Steve, jump in.
On our new building at Century Estate, we do have rooftop gardens all the way through, and productive gardens. So you know, that's just one of the things that we're thinking. The thing I mentioned before about the cars parked underground, that's very much an environmental issue, because when you park those cars on the ground, you ventilate it and you light it for years to come, and you're burning up greenhouse gases usually because you're doing that. But there's no other use that you can get for it. You know, if something happens, what is it? It's a dark hole in the ground. So putting them above, if you can run markets out of them, everything else, but you don't have to ventilate them so much, and you don't have to light them. So a lot of times those initiatives we're talking about do have a lot of environmental upsides as well.
Any other comment on that, Michael? Otherwise I'll go to...
Yeah, look, I think I've been in local government for 32 years and involved in the development industry, and I think over that time we have seen conscious and deliberate efforts to improve environmental performance, and I don't see that disappearing, because now there's quite financial dividends for doing so. So I think our building stock's getting a little bit more resilient, but it doesn't end there, and I think we've also got to acknowledge some challenges. In North Kellyville, one of our current urban release areas, we have a concept called rain gardens. Now they're both in our streets and in people's front and rear yards. Now they're part of the water quality performance of that urban release area, yet we're finding residents aren't valuing it because it looks quite different to what we're used to in our urban landscape. So it is an evolution of everybody's thinking around environmental performance, because we've even had some people remove them because they don't look right. They don't look what their residential suburb should look to see and do. So there's a lot of work in that space, and I think it'll only continue. But we need to bring the community along with us, because we're having real troubles convincing the community of the value of the rain gardens in those subdivisions, and I think that just tells us that there's a communication and an education step that might be missing.
Sounds like an opportunity there. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. If I can ask each of the panellists just to give us a kind of a 30-second summation. You know, the theme of the discussion was around how do we crystallise the vision for the hills, given the transformation that's taking place, so that business can contribute to shaping that transformation. Ed, some final comments?
And I'm saying this, you know, this is really off the top of the head. The hill's the place where I can raise my family and raise my job. Build them both, and we will come.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
The PSI results at first glance, and we saw them earlier, you'll see it in the report, look a bit negative, a result of 0. All 3 measures, conditions, performance, sentiment, down on last year. 17 of the 21 different measures down on last year. So it doesn't paint a great picture. However, that needs to be understood in the context, and that is that the sentiment is in the positive zone, and normally the perception becomes the reality. And this area, like I think all areas of entrepreneurs, are indefatigable. You know, they fight on, otherwise you'd be doing something else. And they have a belief that the next 6 months will be better than the last. I think that's the strongest finding from the report. It's in the clear positive zone, that there is resilience in business here, there is resilience in the business operators, and the future will be brighter than the current. That's I think a good outcome from the report, and overall I think therefore there's positives in it.
I think it's going to be a great time for business. I think particularly here, it's just the changes that are coming are really groundbreaking changes, and it's up to us all, if we want to take advantage of it. I don't know how it affects each and every business, but I do know that that sort of change is going to invoke a lot of growth. I think it's a good point raised about facilities here at Norwest. There's not a lot of vacancies now to what there was years ago, but I think you need to think ahead of time as far as what your real estate needs are, and you have to think of how you can commit to get those spaces earlier. It does change things, but I know that there's not going to be as many buildings built, because they are bigger buildings and that are going to be built in the future. So it's up to each one of us to plan and to think how we can work to get those places committed before the time that you've had in yourselves. As far as all the other things we've talked about, I think it's up to us all to work as a community and to plan and how we can interact better. We've got a project down at Woolooware Bay at the Sharks. We had to come up with 2 new training fields. Where do you go and put those these days? We went to the local high school. People said we'll never get it approved. But the long story short, we signed a 30-year training facility for the Sharks by building 2 new ovals that the school needed, because the school then had more facilities. They were allowed to upgrade and expand the size of the school. And you know, getting an agreement like that with the government, they said couldn't be done, but it can be done. And that's where, as a community, we've got to think, how many of these things can we double up? How many facilities we've got there that are not being used full-time that we can have for another use? And that's where we can get payback on those sorts of things.
Michael.
Look, I think for us the best is still yet to come. We're a great community, a great shire, and we're used to growing and will continue to grow. I think our real challenge is to make sure that we capitalise on the conditions as they exist now, and make sure that the growth, because we're getting growth a little bit differently to what we're used to, to make sure that it actually contributes positively to our quality of life and keeps us as a great Shire to live, work and play.
Thank you all of our panellists for a very informing discussion. Professor Ed Blakely, Mark McCrindle, Steve Grant and Michael Edgar. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our panellists for being part of today. Thank you to you for your questions and contribution. I did mention that I believe this is the start of a conversation, an ongoing conversation. I think the content that we get out of the PSI is a great informer of that conversation, and we're very keen as a chamber to drive these conversations. Our networking time is a little bit truncated. We do have about 10-15 minutes of networking time now available, and there are some prizes at the end, so please stay around for the prizes. Look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you all indeed.